Juliana's disco was packed with people who...
Hi guys, this is Easy Japan. Today we'll be watching why working in Japan is no longer impossible.
Impossible.
I don't think working in Japan is impossible. Fake. This is fake. I think this is not true. I see many people working. So let's watch the video to see what Insight is gonna tell us.
Let's go.
Japan is different. Besides mayonnaise drinks, Hello Kitty mattress,
Mayonnaise
and baby
drinks.
mops, Japan has a unique
That
way
Hello
of
Kitty one's
working.
fake.
Companies traditionally only hire new employees once per year at so-called shukatsu. Soon-to-be graduates dress up in black suits and they hope to find shushin koyo, lifetime
I did
employment.
shukatsu too.
But guess how foreign
I
workers
did it too.
fit in?
I don't want to work for a Japanese company.
It is the worst place in the world to live as a foreigner.
And the feeling is mutual.
If you don't have any intention of respecting us, then leave my country.
Japan has strong cultural values which they rightfully
Who is this
want to
guy?
protect. But there is a problem. Japan's population peaked in 2010 at 128 million and is projected to fall to 87 million by 2070. They have the oldest population in the world and they have amongst the lowest birth rates.
Yes,
Japan
also
needs
true.
more people of working age. They're looking outward. They want to become a more attractive destination for immigrant workers to fill gaps in the labor force. They're overhauling their traditional work culture. They want to get rid of lifetime employment and those insanely long workdays. But is this the answer to Japan's problems? And can they protect themselves from the downsides of mass immigration? This is how Japan works with hindsight.
Hindsight, yes. I agree with this point. We're trying to decrease overwork. It's a big social problem. On the other hand, the number of people working is also decreasing due to the decreasing birth rate. Yeah, let's watch the video.
In the West, Japan's image is attached to faded glory. They were a strong military power during World War II, and they became an economic superpower in the mid-20th century. They were the fastest growing economy in the world for many years and were expected to potentially overtake the United States as the dominant world power, in many ways, like how we see China today. But their economy collapsed and Japan has yet to recover. This left deep marks on Japanese society. One of the most pressing issues today is their shrinking and aging population. These problems are expected to get worse as healthcare improves and the Japanese are unwilling to have more children. The resulting labor shortages are the main reason why Japan is now drastically transforming how they work. But before we get into that, a bit of perspective. After World War II, Japan was destroyed. They lost a quarter of its industrial capacity, but millions of soldiers were re-entering the workforce. They had a labor surplus. Japan was still seen as a poor country with relatively low standards of living. They ranked as the world's 7th largest economy just after China, but they were about to perform an economic miracle. Their abundance of workers helped keep wages low and exports cheap. Japan invested heavily in manufacturing and in technology, and they set off on an economic boom. This period saw the rise of the keiretsu, very large business networks that often received support from the government. This is where a unique work culture emerged. The shukatsu, which literally means job hunting, became commonplace. These events were often held in early April. Students applied for jobs at companies but weren't given a job description. If they were hired, they were expected to work at the same company for life in whatever position their manager saw fit. There were strict rules for how to behave at the office. You don't leave before your boss leaves, and overtime is the norm, not the exception. Even today, it's relatively common to see Japanese workers who are sleeping on them.
Right, it's an unspoken rule, but I think in that time, like in the 1970s, it was spoken.
Really?
Like, I think it's just my image, but my image is that the bosses tell them to not leave early before them.
Yeah. And about the Japanese workers sleeping on the metro trains, it's, well, part of it is because they're tired, but also part of it is because it's safe to sleep inside the train.
Right.
And the commute is very long for them. It's not only because they're tired, it's also safe and you can sleep on the trains. That's one of the reasons.
And I think it's also because how Japan, we don't go to work. Most people don't go to work by cars. Many people use the trains.
Yep.
So compared to other countries, the people who use the trains are mostly the workers, the working people.
You don't sleep on cars, right? Driving.
Right. Well, I do.
'Cause you're tired. Whoa. Hope you're safe.
Okay.
Okay.
Metro. The Japanese have a term, karoshi, which literally means death by overwork.
Karoshi.
But through hard work, smart policies, and luck, Japan's economy grew exceptionally fast. They overtook France, then Germany, and even the UK. All of this in just 15 years' time. And some believe that they could overtake the Soviet Union.
This all came crashing down in a spectacular fashion.
Japan used to be perceived as an impoverished nation, and its products were often seen as cheap and of poor quality. But by the 1970s, that was no longer the case. Japanese books on leadership were read around the globe, and their workplace practices became the industry standard, like total quality control. It used to be customary to check the quality of a product at the end of the manufacturing process. This made quality control punitive. If a car factory noticed a defect, they wanted to make it a problem of sales, and sales tried to pass it on to service. But Japan found a better way. They encouraged departments to report any defects at any stage and to find ways to make production better. This was revolutionary. They also pioneered cross-functional product teams and just-in-time manufacturing, all with the support of the United States, who had become their largest export market by a long shot and who wanted to turn Japan into a model ally, an example of capitalism in Asia. But there came a turning point in the mid-1980s. Japan, the US, and several European countries met in New York at the Plaza Hotel, and they signed a deal to lower the value of the dollar in relation to the yen and the German Deutsche Mark. The intention was to make American exports cheaper, but it did something else. It drastically increased Japan's purchasing power in the United States, and they went on a spending spree. Sony bought Columbia Pictures, and Mitsubishi became the majority owner of Rockefeller Center in New York. This made some U.S.
After the World War, I think $1 was about 360 yen.
Yeah.
Flat, and it hasn't changed until the 1970s. But after this, dollars went down to about 300 yen for $1. It's a big change, 20% decrease. So I think that is one of the main reasons there was an economic boom here.
And the exchange rate changed from flat to float exchange?
Yes. In 1973, it was about 280 yen per dollar. And in 1982, 10 years after that, it became 230 yen.
Okay.
And 10 years after that, it became about 120 yen. Dollars are getting cheaper, 100 yen every 10 years. In 1995, a dollar became 79 yen.
79?
Yes. The current rate is about 150 yen per dollar. So yen was twice as expensive compared now, which I can't imagine.
That's a huge difference.
Right.
Lawmakers a bit uneasy. The Japanese were now flooding the American market with their exports, from Walkmans to Toyotas.
24 valves, 150
Toyota.
power to please.
And the US military had become dependent on Japanese technology, especially on their chips. And there were suspicions that Japan wanted to reassert itself as a military force in Asia. Japan continued climbing in
Like
the ranks
the IC chips?
and eventually overtook the
Oh,
Soviet
yes,
Union.
yes, the
Some
chips.
analysts predicted that they
thought
could
it was potato
overtake the
chips.
US
I thought it was
before the end
potato
of the
chips also.
millennium. Japan's growth
We're so
was
stupid.
exceptional. One of the main benchmarks of Japan's economy is the Nikkei 225, a stock market index of Japan's leading public companies. In the 1980s, it increased 6 times in value. Ronald Reagan became president, and he went on the offensive, calling Japan an unfair trader and calling for sanctions. He put tariffs on Japanese imports, mostly cars and electronics, and he pressured Japan to scale back its development of chips. Japan complied. The downfall of their chip industry helped give rise to these industries in South Korea and Taiwan. But Japan had bigger problems.
So I guess the states start to fear Japan's economic power.
In the car industry, Japan has the cheap and good quality cars. So the American cars, they can't sell their own country's cars to the Americans. That's why they Reagan put the tariffs on the Japanese cars, right?
Yeah, I think if it was the other way around, like if American cars were getting sold in Japan way cheaper, way better, Japan would have done the same.
Yeah, we do it to the white rice.
Right.
To protect the rice industry in Japan because it's so cheap from Thailand or Vietnam.
Yeah.
Another consequence of the Plaza Accords was that Japanese imports in the United States became more expensive. Japan pushed for economic policies that encouraged investment in real estate, driving up prices to ridiculous heights. At some point, land in Tokyo would sell for $139,000 per square foot, nearly 350 times more than in Manhattan. This meant that the grounds of the Imperial Palace were worth more than the entire state of California.
Whoa.
Many realized that this could all come tumbling down.
Yeah, so suddenly, I'm not sure why, but suddenly every single person in Japan believed that real estate will never decrease. In Japanese, we call it the Tochi-shinwa. But so everyone started borrowing money from banks and buy houses in this time.
The inflation occurred, right?
Right.
Call it the bubble era.
Yes, the bubble.
Bubble. I like this dance part.
Yeah, everyone goes dancing in this bubble era.
Maharaja.
No one wanted to rock the boat too much.
Juliana's disco was packed with people who thought the party would go on forever.
Juliana.
They were about to experience the mother of all hangovers.
Thousands and thousands of West Germans come to make the point that the wall has suddenly become irrelevant.
Only days after the Berlin Wall fell, the Nikkei came tumbling down.
People panicked, and of course we saw a massive sell-off this morning.
It was an economic disaster.
There's extraordinary pessimism out there concerning the Japanese economy.
The end of the Cold War set off an economic boom in the West, but Japan took a nosedive. It had been too easy to get credit, real estate was severely overvalued, and too much investment was speculative. The government then failed to respond adequately to underlying issues, and Japan would enter one of the darkest phases of its modern history. This meant that the annual recruitment of employees was paused. Japanese students that were graduating in the 1990s had very limited employment opportunities, and for many, they could only find part-time employment, if anything at all. This was the Shushoku Iogaki, the employment ice age.
Ice age.
Hiring resumed only in earnest in the early 2000s. The 1990s are popularly called the lost decade, and companies now preferred hiring fresh graduates. An entire generation had missed the boat. This is the lost generation, and it has a lasting impact on Japanese society. It encouraged social issues like ikikomori, literally pulling inward or being confined. These are people that seek extreme degrees of social isolation and withdrawal from society, as well as joatsu, disappearance. These are cases where people purposely vanish from their established lives without leaving a trace. Japan's rigid system of hiring employees provided a lot of stability. It gave people job security, and it helped Japan build some of the strongest organizations in the world. But it also facilitated an entire generation to fall behind. Japan fell behind in the charts, while China entered its growth spurt. They overtook France, the UK, Germany, and in 2011, Japan, making China now the second largest economy in the world. There are many similarities between China's economy today and Japan's economy in the 1980s, and between Reagan's stance on Japan and Trump's stance on China. They better be taking notes.
It's time.
This history of Japan has turned into a cautionary tale for the fate that await all capitalist nations. After prosperity comes population decline and a shrinking economy. But Japan's story is far from over. In February 2024, the Nikkei reached another all-time high, exceeding the peak of the early 1990s. Japan's GDP is still lower than when the bubble burst, but the projections show that an upward trend is likely. The greatest strength of Japan has never been its capital or natural resources, but its people. They pulled off its economic miracle through talent, and that's Japan's main priority today. The challenge is clear. Japan...
Whoa. So we have been decreasing our population, but our economic is getting better. Like it updated the best last year, 2024, February.
What happened?
I think that's cool. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's because of the dollar yen rate. Yen became so cheap after the COVID and many foreigners, tourists started to come to Japan, which had a big impact to the economy. I think that is one of
the reason, the inbound.
Yeah, I think so.
It's the world's oldest population, with around 30% being 65 years or older. And this is coupled with some of the world's lowest birth rates. Their workforce currently numbers 74 million people, or just under 60% of the population. Nearly a quarter is the so-called lost generation. They're estimated to number 17 million people and would otherwise have been at the peak of their careers.
Lost generation.
Japan is ready to grow, but many companies find it challenging to find workers. Across industries, companies need 25% more workers, but in some industries like construction, they need 5 times as much.
5 times.
This is the main reason why Japan is looking outward, but immigration is a sensitive topic. Japan has historically been concerned about how immigration affects social harmony and stability. Some fear that an influx of immigrants could disrupt the societal norms and values that define Japan for centuries. And it also goes the other way around. Japanese is a difficult language to learn, and many expats find it challenging to adjust to Japan's rigid hierarchical work culture, while wages are also not that competitive. Japan used to have amongst the highest wages in the world, but over the past 3 decades, real wages haven't grown at all. The yen, the Japanese currency, is weak, making the money you earn worth less abroad and making foreign brands more expensive. As an outsider, it might seem like Japan is much cheaper than it used to be, but not if you're on a Japanese salary. The relative unwillingness of Japanese to welcome immigrants and the relatively low number of workers looking to migrate has turned Japan into some of the most homogeneous societies in the world, with just over 3% of their population being foreign-born. But Japan is stuck, and one of the main reasons was a deep resistance to change and a stubborn attachment to the past. They want to start moving again. Public opinion is changing. A larger percentage of Japanese have a favorable view of accepting immigrant labor, but there's much resistance. The government has already set things in motion. Over the past decade, the number of foreign nationals has already more than doubled. Japan has expanded work visa permits to a number of sectors, and they're easing the requirements for permanent residency. A central component of this new Japan is Atarakikata Kaikaku, work style reform. This is a broad set of reforms that include limits on working overtime, paid annual leave, and shorter work weeks. The intention is that these reforms will improve work-life balance, a relatively new topic in Japan. These plans have been set in motion a while ago, and it's taking time for all Japanese to feel the effects, but more than a third of all workers is currently considering a job change. This would have been much more difficult in Japan's traditional system of lifetime employment. But shorter work weeks and less overtime is also expected to lower productivity, and partly because of these policies, the labor shortage is expected to increase to 185% by 2035. The intention...
Yeah, so as I talked about, working hours decrease, population decrease, so of course the productivity decreases. I can't see how it's going to continue from this year. I see a lot of companies starting 4 working days per week. It's usually 5, right? 8 hours, 5 days. But some companies are starting to do 8 hours, 4 days. Of course the salary decreases, but people are starting to want more private time. Yeah, then productivity decreases. So
is that these reforms will make Japan a more attractive destination for foreign workers. But we know in hindsight that allowing entry to large numbers of foreign nationals can be detrimental for society. It adds extra pressure on social services like education and healthcare. And poor integration can lead to segregation and higher crime rates. There are many concerns like social cohesion, the preservation of Japanese culture, and how a spike of immigrants will affect the cost of housing. And not everybody favors these policies. The demographic challenges of Japan are real, and immigration is not the only answer. Some critics argue that the focus should be on raising birth rates. They already increased subsidy for childcare and education, but these measures are largely meant for married couples that already have children. Others argue that more women should be incentivized to work. Japanese women already have amongst the highest labor force participation rates in the world, higher than the US. But much can be improved. Japan has some of the lowest shares of women in politics, and they have the highest gender wage gap. Women often don't work and couples often don't have children because they feel discouraged by bleak job prospects, a high cost of living, and a work culture that makes it difficult for both partners to provide. Other alternatives would be to focus on adopting better technology and on growing sectors that have higher productivity. But the government's eyes are currently set on allowing entry to more foreign workers. It's difficult to predict Japan's future, not just because they're neighbors with North Korea and China and are situated on one of the world's most seismically active regions, but also because they're so different. During the pandemic, they were almost unique in that they didn't enforce a lockdown, and they also had amongst the world's lowest levels of mortality, despite having a large elderly population. And whereas the rest of the world is battling with skyrocketing prices for housing, Japan is doing much better. Tokyo is often seen as one of the last affordable big cities. They were amongst the few countries that managed to keep building houses when demand increased. They might not fall victim to some of the same challenges as other countries are facing when they begin accepting high numbers of migrant workers. But whether accepting foreign workers addresses Japan's root causes is up for debate. Japan has a unique way of thinking out of the box. They do things differently. But projections of Japan's economic future have not been this positive in many years.
So the conclusion why working in Japan is impossible, is it because of the salary?
Well, I don't think it's impossible by watching this video. I think this video was trying to say Japan's too different from other countries. It's really hard for you to predict how Japan's gonna be. So that's because you can't image yourself living in Japan after 10 years.
It's harder to imagine yourself ending your life in Japan, like living 30, 40 years, because you can't predict how it's gonna become. Right. There's not much of a merit coming to Japan because of the wages. If you're thinking about going back to your own country after you retire, you won't have any money because Japan's wage is too low to live in another country. If you're going to keep living in Japan, then you will be able to purchase things cheaper. But if you're going to go home, go back to your country, then it's going to be very tough. That's why Japan is currently struggling to get foreign workers.
If you're searching for higher wages, you won't come to Japan. But if you're searching for a safe life, Japan's the answer for it.
Yeah, maybe after retirement, that might be good.
It's cheap, it has good food, it's safe.
Yeah, we're in Japan. You might see easy Japan. Even Japanese people who want higher wages go to other countries to earn more money.
That's true.
Working in Japan, it's not impossible, but it's definitely getting harder.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
That's one of the reasons hindsight is saying why working in Japan is impossible.
Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe, give us a good button if you liked the video. Please come to Japan if you think you're a good train sleeper. Bye!
Bye!